and welcome to this edition of The Fourth Gear, sponsored by Classic Auto Insurance. I'm your host, Jeff Broadus, and today I'm with Mr. Bill Warner, who is probably best known right now as the founder of the Amelia Island Concours. However, your career and automotive path started way before Amelia Island.
Oh yeah, it started when I was a mere child. I had a tricycle I thought was a Buick.
And you did a lot of work for Road and Track. You were a contributor, writer, photographer, dating back quite a ways. I'm assuming a lot of the work you were doing for them was race related. Would that be correct?
All race related. Yeah, it started with Sports Car Graphic in 1967. That's the runoffs. And I was with Sports Car Graphic till 71. They closed up, and then Road and Track was looking for someone down here because magazines are historically cheap. And if they could find someone in Jacksonville to go to Daytona, it was cheaper than sending someone from LA. I ended up being it. At the time, there was a lady shooting out of Miami named Alice Bixler, and she moved to Canada. So that there was a void down here for photographers. And they wanted someone who not only knew cars, but knew photography. So I kind of fit in.
You kind of hit both. Yeah, no doubt. And now your automotive journey actually started very early. I remember a story, and you can elaborate on it a little bit. I believe it was about a Griffin when you first saw it. A Griffith, is that correct?
No, I don't remember that. I remember Griffiths because I knew Jack Griffith. He was a neighbor of ours here. No, that's too late. The first car I saw that really tripped my imagination was probably the 53 Corvette.
Ah.
And when it came to Jacksonville, it had not been announced as a public production car. So they had 3 dealers, and they had to be ecumenical in this thing. So they rented the ballroom of the Roosevelt Hotel in Jacksonville. And my father took me down there, and I sat and stared at that car and stared at the car. See, I was 10 years old then. And I decided one day I was going to own one of those. And it ended up many years later, I had a 54 that I restored. And the first time I drove it, I said, gee, why on earth did I want this thing? It's terrible.
Well,
then I went out on a 55 because it had a V8 and a 12-volt ignition. It drove just as bad as a 54.
Now, of course, you're a pretty tall guy. And for somebody your size to be sitting in that model car, I'm surprised your head and eyes just didn't stick out over top the windshield.
It did. You didn't drive it with a top up. When you drove it with the top down, you stuck out of it like a circus bear. It was a car that I described as you tow it within a mile of where you want to be seen in it, and then drive it in, and make your big exit, and then get out and put it back on the trailer and haul it home. But they were beautiful. They were stunningly beautiful. And for 1953, they were a rocket ship.
Yep. And it was, the war was over, and by about 10 years, and they were really trying to make their statement with a sports car. Of course, Corvette's still being produced today now with the C8. And yeah. I don't know if you've driven the new C8 yet.
I had the second one.
Ah.
Delivered it to me on the field 2 years ago when we did the feature on the mid-engine Corvettes.
Ah.
And my deal was, let's do the thing on the mid-engine Corvettes. Oh, by the way, I'll buy one if you'll deliver it on the field. And it's serial number 340, but it was the second one delivered. Rick Hendrick got the first one.
Wow.
And he paid $3 million for it, and I saved $2,920,000 getting the second one.
Wow. Wow. Now, you talk a little bit about the first car. Well, what's the first actual collector car you purchased, and why did you purchase it?
The collector car would have been, I was out on the road selling filters, and I was driving a Buick at that time because my dad drove Buicks, and I just didn't feel it. Let's see, how old was I then? I was 34 years old. Was I? No, 28 years old. And I just didn't feel that fit me. So I had a chance to buy a Porsche 911, brand new, $7,900. So I bought a basic 911T with chrome wheels and air conditioning for $7,900 from my friend Steve Biden. And I still have it 51 years later. Ran the 1975 Cannonball in it, bumped it up to a 2.7 with Webers, got the wheels off Peter Gregg's Trans Am car, added the deck lid from the George Stone Carrera and a spoiler bumper. And it's kind of simple, but it's nice. And it's quick, you know. And by today's standards, it's not all that quick, but by the standards of 1971, it's pretty quick.
What cars today are you most interested in or considering adding to your collection?
Well, I just bought a car about 6 months ago, one of the original Roger Penske Banjo Matthews IROC Camaros.
Ooh.
And it was driven in the IROC series by Mario Andretti, Al Unser, Rick Mears, Cale Yarborough, and Jackie Eakes. I look for cars that have interesting histories or an interesting story. One I miss, I've got a 63 Buick Riviera that I've restored, which I really love. I love the looks of the Riviera. It was a styling or design tour de force. I'd really like to have a 65 Grand Sport, but now after Meekum, when 3 of them sold for over 100 grand a piece, I think I'm out of that market.
Wow.
Unless I find some widow who doesn't know what she has, I'm afraid I can't afford one of those.
Now, when you think about the best find perhaps you've ever done, the car that comes to mind for me when I think about cars that you found and showed is that Ford Edsel car.
It is. The 1934 Ford Special Speedster built for Edsel Ford in 1934. I found it, a gentleman had it in a garage in Orange City, Florida, 2 blocks off Highway 17 and 92. And after I found it, I thought, how many people drove by this garage every day and didn't know one of the most iconic Fords ever built was in that garage.
How did you come about it? How did you find out about it?
A guy in Jacksonville about 40 years ago told me that he knew where Edsel Ford's car was, but he wouldn't tell me. Okay, it's fair. You know, he was trying to strike a deal himself. So years went by, and in Classic and Sports Car magazine, they had a picture of it and said, "We wonder where this is today." I said, "Well, I know where it is. It's in DeLand." So I was judging at Meadowbrook with Michael Lamb. I said, "Michael, you did a story on that car about 30 years ago. Do you remember who owned it?" And he told me, and it was an unusual name. It was Palash, P-A-L-L-A-S-C-H. So I Googled Palash, DeLand, Florida, and came up with a name in Orange City, which was next door. And I called him up and said, "Would you bring the car to Amelia? It hasn't been seen in 40 years. It'd be great to have on the field." He said, "I don't want to bring it to any show. I want to sell it." Okay, I'll be there in an hour. And it's usually about an hour and 20 minutes from Jackson to Orange City. I made it in about 50 minutes. And took 3 visits and then struck a deal on the car.
Wow.
That was a good one. And then I found the ex-Denny Home Brabham BT8 in a South Carolina junkyard. That car won every under 2-liter race it ran in, won the tourist trophy over such people as Jim Clark in the Cooper, or in the Lotus 30, John Surtees and David Hobbs in the Lola T70s, the Cobra Daytona Coupes, a little 2-liter sports racer sitting in a junkyard. So then 2 years later, the guy called me, he says, "I got a Cooper, you want it?" And I went up there, and it was in Columbia, South Carolina. It was one of the Shelby King Cobras, the last one built, called the Lang Cooper. So I've been very, very fortunate, just following my nose.
It sounds like the hunt's as exciting as being able to not only get the car, but bring it back, perhaps restore it, and then either show it or race it.
There is. The Ford didn't need restoration. It was all original. The Brabham needed a full restoration. I raced it for 12 years. And then I began thinking, you know, you're laying down between 2 11-gallon tanks of gasoline and the coolant's running through the chassis rails. Oh, probably isn't a real smart thing to do.
Now, of course, you enjoy vintage racing. You and I both have owned a TR6. Mine was rally racing. Yours is vintage racing.
Mine was a Group 44 car, and it was sold by Group 44 to Paul Newman. I raced it 28 years. And then Adam Carolla bought it for his Paul Newman collection.
Ah, okay. Okay. Now, at what point did your hobby kind of take over your life?
Well, it was always part of my life. My father used to tell me, if you don't get these damn cars out of your brain, you'll never make a living. But the cars actually saved the filter company twice. When we needed cash, the cars were there to generate it. I didn't want to sell them. I never want to sell a car, but there are times in life when, you know, you got to give things up to make other things happen.
Yep.
And fortunately, I'm at that time, I don't have to sell a car now. I'm sorry I sold the Brabham BT8. I was kind of glad to see the Lang Cooper go away because it was a handful. It was more car than I could have or should have driven.
So what do you think is the best car you ever bought? How did you find it? Why did you buy it?
Well, the 911 all around was the best car. You know, it was comfortable, it was quick, it was economical. You could get, you know, two people could travel in it easily. You could squeeze two people in the back seat for a short distance if you had to. It has a timeless look. A 71 911 is instantly recognizable as a Porsche even today, the same shape. That probably, let's see, collector cars. That's probably the best. The ones that I'm sorry I sold were the Brabham. And to a certain extent, the Ford, although Ford needed to go to a better home because it got so valuable that we wouldn't use it. Jane and I would, you know, we go out and get a pizza in it. Then those days stopped when the car got into seven figures.
Well, no doubt when that car finally surfaced and it got out in the public's eyes, the interest and the media and everything, everybody jumped all over that car because let's face it, it was an extremely rare car. And the pedigree of that car in itself, it was a story all in itself.
That's right. It was one of one. It was built for the son of Henry Ford. It was complete and unrestored. It had all the things going, but you know, something like that doesn't belong to a person. You're kind of a caretaker for it. And as much as I love the car, it really needed to go to a home where other people could enjoy it. And I did all right on it. I mean, I was able to buy a Ferrari Daytona with the money and remodel a house. So, you know, and Miss Jane's been very, very patient. You know, cars would follow me home. And most of the time she'd say, why do you want that? One time I bought a BMW M1 I found and bought it sight unseen. And with all good intention of fixing it up, making a profit. And Jane looked at it, she said, gee, of all the cars you brought home, I like this one the best. So that one for a while.
Now, let's go back to the Amelia Island Concours for a moment. I was there on the first Amelia Island Concours, which I believe was on Father's Day weekend.
It was on Easter.
Easter, that's what it was. It was Easter weekend. And it was kind of foggy. It was kind of a quaint, if you will. Maybe a lot of concours start off that way. It was kind of quaint. I don't know that the average person who sees Amelia today realizes the work, the commitment, and the vision that goes into what you had then and what it is today.
Yeah, nowadays people who put on shows want to start at the top, and you can't. It's like anything else in life. You got to kind of pay your dues. If you remember, we had those no-see-em bugs. I mean, tons of bugs. That was kind of a practice show to find out what we didn't know. And then after that, we'd spray for bugs. You know, we decided that the Ritz-Carlton wanted to have it on Easter Sunday because it was a slow weekend for them, and they wanted to fill the hotel. And I said, no more Easter. You know, even NASCAR doesn't race on Easter. Just get away from that. So we moved to March, a second weekend in March, generally, because a lot of collectors from up north who come to Florida go back north on April 1. So we wanted to catch them while they were still down here. There's a lot of factors and a lot of facets that go on for putting on a show, as you well know, because you were involved in the Lake Mirror Classic. I mean, everything. I became an expert on portalets. You know, how many portalets you had to have per person, an expert on rain insurance. The fact you had to hire a meteorologist to stand in the middle of the field and measure the rain for the insurance company in 10th-inch increments. A lot of things I didn't want to know, I figured out.
You know, I saw you work under pressure. I've known you quite a while. Yeah. And I've noticed one year there was a horrible rainstorm, and I can't remember. All I remember is you had all the Corvettes there. You had unbelievable composure through the whole thing. I don't know if that's your military training or how you do that. Going through a named storm that came through my show, I was nowhere near as keeping things together as you were. How?
Well, I don't remember being composed. I remember thinking that this is the end. Show is over. And a guy named Gene Epstein and Sam Mann and Richie Klein passed the hat. and raised $60,000.
Sitting in the ballroom, sitting on the floor.
Yeah.
They decided they were going to do that.
And
I was there.
it kept us going. Today, if you had to pass the hat, you'd have to pass a $3 million hat.
Wow.
So we have the time that Haggerty took over, I had 9 employees, 8,800 square foot building. We had developed our own personal software for scoring, our software for entry. We had, over the 26 years, we had really developed and fine-tuned it. The nice part now is we were the only show to have a show in 20 and 21. We beat COVID by 3 days in 20, and we moved to May in 21 and got through it. This year was the first year in 27 years that I had a normal Christmas. I didn't worry about it. I don't worry about COVID. I don't worry about weather. I don't worry about sponsorship. You know, we've had sponsors try to pull with the last 2 weeks, 6 weeks out.
Yep.
I mean, people think this is fun. This is work. You understand that. This is work. You work. My goal when we started out was to bring a world-class show to North Florida, because we felt North Florida was centrally located. At that time, we weren't thinking globally. We were thinking regionally. We were equidistant between Charlotte, Atlanta, Tampa, Miami. We figured we had about 20 million people we could draw from, never knowing that we would outlive the Geneva Auto Show, nor have a conflict with the Geneva Auto Show, and we would have a worldwide impact. You shoot for the stars, but you try to accomplish things that are reasonable that you can accomplish. Had a lot of great support from the manufacturers, from Mercedes-Benz, BMW, General Motors, Lexus, time to time Ford, time to time Chrysler. Sponsors come and go. You still have that nut you have to crack every year to pay the bills.
Yes, you do.
The sad part is that the cost of putting on the shows is such that the ticket entry is now ridiculous. I heard that the show in Palm Beach last week, it was like $450 a ticket to go.
Right.
You go to the Wednesday night hangar party at Monterey, it's $800-900.
Yep.
I mean, who are they? I know who they're trying to attract, but how many people are willing to spend $2,000 to sip champagne and see their friends? That isn't me.
You know, and I think there were two things that set Amelia Island apart from every other Concours in the country, maybe in the world. Number one, it always had a very inviting environment. You have this uncanny ability to remember people and names, and everybody was welcome. Everybody was part of the family. You felt good when you were there. And you also, racing was your theme.
Yeah.
And you became known as the Pebble Beach of the East Coast very quickly because of what you created there. And that's never been duplicated. And
Well,
I think that's a credit to you.
Thank you. I'm going through life being the Avis of everybody, you know, always number two. When I went to the Citadel, they said, you went to the West Point of the South. I said, no, West Point's the Citadel of the North. Everybody was comparing us with Pebble Beach, and I was honored to be compared with them. It is the granddaddy of all shows. It is spectacular. It's well run. It's in a beautiful area. But we wanted to have our own DNA. And our DNA was going to be about racing, because that's where I came from. I went to my first race, 1959. And I started shooting races, really. I started photographing things at races, 1960. So I saw that there were some great cars out there that were never going to make it to the racetrack again. They got too valuable. And you had to have a place to do it. So why not celebrate them at a Concours? I'm not a kind of guy that likes to pick grass out of the tires. You know, I chose cars a lot of times because of the theme, the story we were trying to tell. We were telling the history of Corvette, or if we were telling the history of Duesenberg or something like that. I tried to choose cars, not necessarily 100-point cars, but cars that told the story of the manufacturer. And I think in some cases, we may have lost perspective on these cars. They're, in many cases, are much nicer now than they ever were when they were new.
Over restored, you're referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I understand it. I've restored cars. I've restored, I don't know, half dozen cars in my life. And when you get one apart, it's just as easy to do it really good as to do it really bad. You know?
Well, that's That's the ongoing argument when they talk about restoration. You start to tear a car apart, like you said, you might as well just take the whole thing, frame off, just do the car and do the car right, opposed to trying to do cosmetic. Because
Yeah,
you're going to go back, it's very difficult to do I call it a cosmetic restoration.
yeah. And then you get into something like the NCRS, in 54 through 55 Corp, 66, 54, 53, 54, 55. The doors never fit right. If you make them fit right, they knock you down on points.
That's right.
So you have to restore the car with the knowledge of what it was like when it was delivered. And
Yeah.
in some cases, there's overspray, and I don't know, I would like you. I tell David Schultz, my good friend, he says, when I took the Ford up to his show at Glenmore Gathering, he says, how do you want it judged? I said, I don't want it judged. He said, you don't want the car judged? I said, no, let the car speak for itself. People have to see the car, that's fine. I don't need a trophy. And you don't? I said, no, I'm just here for the beer. So that's our joke now. I'm just here for the beer. I'm taking a 32 Ford Highboy. They asked me to bring it to Amelia Island this year. I will not have it judged. I'm happy with the car. I like the car. I know the car is good. I bought it from Buddy Pep. It's a West Coast car built in 1953 or 1950, remodeled in the year 2000. I don't need someone to tell me what's right or wrong. I don't care. I like the car.
And that's really when you give people advice on what should you look for, whether it's your first car, you're starting to build a small collection of cars. I think you hit the nail on the head. Start with buy the car you like.
That's right. Because if everything tanks, you still have a car that you like.
Yep.
I've only bought one or two cars to make a buck on it. And in each case, I lost money. So I learned a lesson there. Just buy what you like. I had a Corvair Monza Spider that I bought. And I thought, well, this will be one I'll do all right on. And but I sold it to Charles Mallory, who now runs the Lime Rock. He came down to look at it. He says, golly, I had one just like this when I was a kid. He says, I really like it. I said, okay. I said, but before you buy it, I want you to know one thing. He says, what's that? I said, this is like your first girlfriend. The memory of her is better than she ever was. He bought the car, so she must have been a pretty good girlfriend. That's all I can think of. But I got a call from a friend of mine down in Tampa the other day, and he said, a friend of mine's got some money and he wants to buy cars. What should he buy? I said, I cannot tell you. I don't know what he should buy. He should buy what he likes. It may not be what I like, but it's what he likes. And if he likes it, the chances are someone else likes it. So they may not consider that a correct answer, but it's the only answer I can give.
Yep.
Right now, if I was to tell somebody to buy a car right now, I'd say buy a 63 to 65 Buick Riviera. I just think up until Mecum, they were underpriced. You can still get a 63 or 64 at a reasonable price. You can spend 30 grand, get the nicest one around. I like those. I think they're pretty. I don't think you'll lose money on one, but I can't think of too many more. I got a new Corvette C8. I think it's one of the most fantastic cars ever built. It does everything right. I've had it 2 years now, haven't touched it other than to drive it. I think General Motors did a phenomenal job on that car. Yep. I won't live long enough for it to be a collectible.
Well, it's years ago, I used to write a column called Next Collectible, and it definitely falls into that category.
Yeah. Well, the strange one was a Ford GT. I have one of those that I bought when they were new. Jay Mays helped me get one right off the bat. And I think this sticker price was $149. I've got about 20,000 miles on it now. Low mileage ones are bringing stupid money, $350, $300. And, if you got a heritage color one, which is ugly as a mud fence, orange and blue, give me a break. You want to be a boy racer? They're $500,000. Now, those guys are out of their minds. I'm sorry. If you own one, you're not very smart. You paid $500,000 for one.
Well, they just sold that at Mecum this past weekend, $600,000+. And you're right, the Ford GTs were a stampede. I think the cheap one went for $400,000.
But that's crazy. And the thing is, they call it the heritage color, right? Orange and blue. That's not Ford heritage color. That's John Wire Gulf Racing heritage color. If you want to do Ford's heritage color, get Guards blue with the white stripes. The first GT40 that ever won a major race was the Daytona Continental. It was dark blue with white stripes. That's the heritage color. Marketing, people in marketing are generally youthful and exuberant, but not necessarily well informed.
Well, it's very well stated. You know, when you think about all you've done in this hobby, and the list is, we could barely even scratch the surface in this, in our communication, our
No big
broadcast
deal.
today.
I did what I enjoyed.
What is there something that is the most memorable experience that comes to mind when you kind of reflect back on all you have done in this hobby?
There's several. Jack Baldwin and I raced at Watkins Glen with Charlie McCarthy, finished 5th overall after dropping down to about 40th when Charlie III got struck by lightning in the parking lot. He turned out okay, but it was a challenging weekend. We didn't put a wheel wrong. We didn't hit anybody. No one hit us. You know, it was a great race. 24 hours. I bought that car. It's at the garage. Running the Cannonball, 1975. That was like stealing cookies from the cookie jar. You know, it was a Walter Mitty thing. Everybody said, "I wish I'd done it." And my answer, "Well, why didn't you do it?" You know, I took a week off from business and never been to California. Seemed like a good reason to go. And it was a lot of boredom. You know, you exit the Holland Tunnel and suddenly you realize you've got about 2,800 more miles to go.
Yeah.
And then I ran the Amelia in a 56 Studebaker Golden Hawk loaned to me by the late Leo Schiegel, a wonderful guy. And Frank Campanelli and I drove it. We had a ball. And then 2 years later, I ran the Amelia with Paul Gould in his 1934 Alfa Romeo 1750. So the road events were fun and memorable. You got to see the countryside. You got to drive interesting cars. People waved at you. They gave away pasta, you know, bottles of wine. It was it was fun.
You share the cockpit with Frank, and that in itself is an adventure.
Well, a friend of ours in Detroit said 2 type A personalities in the same car is going to be an interesting experiment in futility. And I said, you know, we got along fine. The deal was whoever was behind the wheel drove, and whoever was in the right seat navigated. And the navigator never told the driver what to do. And it worked fine. We didn't hit anything. Middle of the night, we blew by 2 or 3 300 SL Gullwings with this 56 Studebaker, which would do about 105 miles an hour wide open. And I began thinking, wow, this is really stupid. You know, this car had brakes that would work on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I think, but it was fun. You know, funny, the road tours and the racing have always come back to me. I come back to the point I'm not really a Concours guy, even though I put one on. The Concours to me was, I described it as every year I had this palette, this canvas and a palette, and I'd paint a picture every year of the history of the automobile companies. And then every year we do one goofy class, whether it was Cars of the Cowboys or What Were They Thinking or beach cars, to entertain people who didn't care about cars. And that was the fun part. Putting the goofy classes together was as fun as anything.
That's a neat theme. Well, you know, kind of our closing thoughts here. What's the best advice you could give anyone who is coming into our hobby today?
Have a patient wife. Generally don't borrow money to buy your cars. Keep your eye out. Don't necessarily, although it's good to, if you're well off, it's good to buy what you want. But otherwise, buy what comes your way and get excited about it. I wasn't looking for a Brabham BT8 when I bought a BT8. I was looking for a birdcage Maserati that was supposed to be in the same junkyard, and it wasn't. It was a 450S, and it was long gone. So I bought this Brabham BT8, and when I got it, I started researching and found out it was Denny Holmes' car. It was a tourist trophy car driven by Frank Gardner, driven by Tony Lanfranchi, ran in North Africa, ran in the United States at Monterey and Riverside, won at Alton Park, and went to all the circuits in England. The car had a fabulous history, and the fun was getting that documentation, finding the magazines, finding the stories. And one time I was having dinner in Palm Beach at Brian Redmond's thing with David Piper. He said, "Oh, you had the BT8. I raced against that in Tripoli." I said, "You did?" He said, yeah. Denny Holm was on the front row of that car. So that's the exciting part and that's why I like race cars. They got stories that go with them, and they're kind of easy to track.
And you've done very well in your racing career. You've had a lot of fun. You've won several races, vintage races. You know, that's a hobby all in itself, way outside of the collector car hobby.
Yeah, one thing I am disenchanted with some vintage racing now is it's too easy to get a license. When I started racing in 1977, I went to Skip Barber School. I had to go to regional schools. I had to check in with the clerk of the course. They had to observe you. Then you got a national license. They had to observe you. Then after a year, you got your full national license and you could apply for an FIA. So you had to go through a schooling, kind of like, you know, Bush League on up. Nowadays, you fog up a mirror, you get a McLaren M8F. I mean, that's it's disturbing to me because the quality of driving has been diminished.
And that's somewhat of a challenge too. A lot of up and coming executives go out and they buy these super fancy sports cars, you know, yeah. Lamborghinis, everything else, Ferraris. They really don't know how to drive them. They don't understand the power. They don't understand what it takes to really control a car that has 600 or 700 plus horsepower.
No, I tell people it's more fun to drive a slow car fast than a fast car. Because a slow car, it'll teach you to be smooth. You know, you don't have power to get you out of trouble. You know, the first car I ran in a professional race was a 6-hour BFG race in a Honda Civic. Qualified 72nd, I think, out of 76, and finished 23rd. You know, only because we didn't pass anybody. Everybody kept braking. And then I moved up to a Datsun B210 and ran one of the Devendorf cars with the Heron Low at Daytona. And then I bought the next Bob Sharp B210. And that was a great car. That was built by Bob Cuneo, who built a lot of Newman cars and built the Crosal car. And he built great race cars. And unfortunately, I totaled that out at Sebring one year, and nearly myself. So, you know, I look back in some of the races. One of the races I really enjoyed, we won the GT race at Mid-Ohio with Bill Mitchell and Sean and Larry Hendricks and Buddy Norton and I in a Camaro. And it was an automatic transmission car. It was the first win of a production automatic transmission car ever. And I got a great deal of pleasure out of that win.
I left everybody that was there that day kind of scratching their head saying, what just happened?
You just got automatically beat.
Yeah. Well, Bill Warner, thank you so much. Thank you for being part of our broadcast today.
Always a pleasure. And my years being around you at Lake Mirror and up at Amelia have been priceless, and I thank you.
Well, we will see you again here at Amelia Island, just around the corner, 6 weeks away. I'll be there, and we look forward to seeing you and your lovely bride, Jane, as well.
Thanks so much. Take care now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.